Good morning. My name is Colin Shaffer, and I am the Managing Director of Galleries at Jamestown Community College. And I'm joined today by Rich Garrison, who is one of the exhibiting artists in the Weeks Gallery's current exhibition, Kaleidoscopic. Rich was kind enough to spend a little time with us this morning to share some of his methods and motivations as part of our virtual programming around this exhibition. Rich earned a bachelor's degree in studio art from the College of St. Rose in Albany and his MFA in painting from Cornell University. He is represented by the Robert Henry Contemporary, and his work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and can be found in numerous public and private collections. Rich lives and maintains his studio in the Hudson Valley of New York. Welcome, Rich, and thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today.
No problem. Thanks for asking me.
You were born and raised in Albany, and I'm wondering if there was any sort of defining moment as you were growing up there when you kind of knew that you were an artist or going to be an artist, or if you were just always the creative type.
I think, looking back, I think primarily I was always the creative type. I was always drawing, painting. I never really made it to like a major museum until probably I was a teenager, but I was always interested in making art. So I think it was just, I've always been drawn to that. I think for a little while, I thought maybe I wanted to go to the computers. That didn't last long though. I ended up, pursuing art. So it's always been something I've been very interested in.
Nice. So you still live and work in Albany area. Do you find that community support and engagement has contributed to your success as an artist?
Yes, I do. I think most of the friends that I've made and contacts in school, I went to St. Rose here in Albany, and I'm still in contact with a number of people that I was in school with, as well as many of the professors as well. And there's also a couple others. The schools are kind of disappearing to some degree, but there are a lot of art schools and art gallery museums in the area. And so you find that there's quite a thriving community in Albany. And I think it's important, it's like, you end up being in the studio a lot by yourself, sure. But there still is a lot of contact. And even if you just have a small group of people, even if it's just, a number you can count on one hand, that you can really count on, like talking to, asking opinions, not being afraid of what someone's going to think or judge you about. It's very important. You don't need a lot of that. You just need one or two people that you can really feel like you can go to at any time to talk. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. And I think that's really important, because you can end up getting, locked in your studio too long and become too isolated, and that can be problematic too. So I think it is important to have that community. It doesn't have to be huge, but it's important to have that kind of, sounding board that you can kind of base, ideas off of.
Sure. And actually that brings up something I've asked a lot of artists recently is, when you're talking about being locked in your studio or kind of isolated there, how has COVID affected that for you? Have you, I kind of get the polar opposites. I have artists who are, well, it was actually great because I was able to focus and spend more time and had less distractions. But then I have other artists who say I wasn't able to access my studio space. There was a lot of anxiety. So just how did that affect you in your practice?
I hate to say this because, it was such a horrible thing, but it was, as far as studio time went, it was amazing. It was like, it was a gift. It really was. The first thing that I did when I knew, when lockdown happened, was I knew okay, I didn't know how long, but I had a feeling it was going to be a while. And so it was like, okay, I wanted to make some new work, especially about just being at home. But then the big thing was, I was like, all right, I got to go through my inventory. I got to look at and see, what kind of paper I have, what paints, materials. So I ended up going through And I have this really, really bad habit of, because if you know my work, a lot of it is pretty time consuming. It's laborious. And I have this bad habit of, getting like a quarter done, an eighth done, and just like, this isn't going to work out. This is no good. I'm going to move on. And so when I started looking through all like my archive, I found about 7 or 8 things going back from like 2010 all the way to around 2018 that were pretty substantial. Some were smaller, and I abandoned for various reasons. I mean, really, I don't know if it was just a whim. I don't know. I can't even explain some of these things that I abandoned. And at first I thought, okay, I can cut the paper down, reuse the unused paper. But then I put them all on the wall, and I just kept looking at them and just like realized, all right, I have this time. Let me finish some of these things. So one at a time, finished one, and I was pleasantly surprised, and so 2 years later, actually this one right behind me here is, I think, something from like 2010 that I started. It was about a quarter done, and I've been staring at it and putting it away, and I'm still working on it. I think I'm on the track where it's going to get finished within the next couple of weeks. So I ended up finishing like 7 or 8 things. And some of them were quite large, substantial, that I never thought I would. And it was a tremendous learning experience. And I think the big thing I took away from that was you got to trust yourself. Because I found that all these things that I just said, oh no, this isn't going to be worth it, no good, too much work, they ended up being some of the better things that I've made in a very long time. They were really surprising, and they were ambitious. And I think that's what it was. It was almost like I had to take a leap of faith in doing that. It's saying, okay, if it takes, 2 months to do, and if it's no good, okay, it's no good. I'm going to learn something from it. And so that was really important. And I also ended up, developing, it was also a time, because we'll get into, I guess, some of my like circular series and things like that. It became a time where my mode of operation that I've been doing for a long time has literally become outmoded. And I'll talk more about that when we get to the circulars. So it was like thinking about new ways of working. And that time that I had, especially those first couple months, were really important to kind of help me develop some ways to kind of move forward with what I'm doing. So it was tremendous, luckily, my family stayed healthy. It was fine. There was some hardship, definitely, but in the studio, it was fantastic. It was really great. So
I think that, and you're not alone. And the idea that you were able to kind of revisit things that maybe, and kind of reaffirm your processes, or gain a little more self-confidence just by working through those pieces. And I think that's sometimes a large barrier for a lot of visual artists, is that kind of self-critiquing, that, is this going to, am I on the right track here? And maybe just sometimes having the time to actually push through those things and see them through reveals a lot in the end. And it's a really good way for artists to grow.
Yeah, and I think the time thing was probably the biggest thing why I abandoned so much stuff, is because you only have so much time, and it's like you feel like, oh, this isn't going to be so great. Okay, let's move on. You don't have time for this. And so all of a sudden I had time for this. Right. And I was like, all right, what's my excuse? So, right. So I'm hoping that now when I start something, you got to see it through. You got to finish it. And if it's no good, it's no good. But I learned a big lesson from this.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be one thing if it was like 1 or 2 things, but it was like 7 or 8 things, that I finished. And that said a lot about my decision-making process that I need to think about. So, yeah.
That's interesting. Well, let's, speaking of the color scheme works, those are some of the the pieces that we're featuring in this exhibition from your circular color scheme series. And they have this very ordered, mathematical kind of chart-like appearance, but I also find them to be extremely dynamic, and they have almost this kind of explosive quality to them as I look at them on the wall. And I was wondering if you could talk about your process and motivations for creating those pieces. And actually, as you do, I'm gonna share my screen here, and so the audience can see some of the pieces we have in the show.
Okay. So the circulars, I've been working on those now. I've been working, probably almost 14 years. And this is one actually that was abandoned, bring it up. I think I had from the top center down to that really large wedge of blue and orange done. And that was done like 2013, let it sit. And I finally got around to finishing it. And I think I stopped working on it because I didn't like the way the paper was kind of was warping a little bit. Well, I figured that out. I figured what to do with the paper. So again, another learning technical thing that came along the way. But the circulars, initially, my work really got started with suburban landscape, especially like parking lots, big box stores, and I think it was like around 2000. Walmart, Target, they moved into my area, and before that, it was just Kmart pretty much. So it started becoming this landscape change. And initially I was working outdoors, and then one day my wife on a Sunday morning with the paper, she's looking through making grocery lists and cutting out coupons and stuff, and I saw these flyers that were on the table, and I just thought, oh, it's kind of interesting where the landscape is kind of coming inside the house. And so I started looking at the flyers, and a friend of mine, Bill Bergman, to make this a little bit shorter here, he suggested that, why don't you create like a formula to analyze this information in terms of, so you can break down the structure of it, because I was interested in the colors of the items and the advertising and graphics. So the structure was based on a 360-degree model that could be, manipulated into different kind of different applications, and started working with that. And the initial kind of design was based on the Target logo, the proportions of it. And there was always this kind of hollow center, primarily because, working too small and tight towards the center could get complicated. But then I just really liked, even though, as you say, they are really dynamic and colorful, and hopefully they kind of, because there's a certain perspective to it, they kind of suck you in. There's that emptiness in the center that always has been very important to me, surrounded by all this color. And, I think that the circulars, what I was alluding to earlier, circulars are almost, they're a dying breed. Walmart stopped printing them about 2 years ago. They still generated them, like online, but then a few months ago they stopped making them all together. So like there's no kind of circular format or advertisements that they do. Target was printing theirs until about Halloween last year, and now they stopped making them, and now they're all online. And I'm imagining one day they're just going to stop it all. So it's becoming something of it's disappearing. And so these things that I'm making work on are basing the work on. It's forcing me to kind of change my operation. Now I showed you earlier in a conversation, I have stacks and stacks of circulars that I've been storing for the last 15 years, which I could definitely use. But the fact that the advertising kind of means is changing, it's making me become more interested in kind of adapting my work to that, rather than like working with this kind of necessarily just outmoded thing. So it's still around, it's still there, but it really is, it's like, it's fading away. It's fading away. And so those circulars, if you look at them, they're very colorful, lots of different shapes, and but they're all based on the advertising, all the products that I see in particular flyers, and the sizes are dependent upon the literal scale of things on the flyer, and so that gets broken down into an Excel program, and that lays it out, and they're not done on the computer at all. They're all hand done. And I really don't know what they're going to look like until they're finished. I have a little schematic. This is about all I have. It's just like a little, it's a very kind of crude drawing to like make sure I got all my numbers, and everything's kind of laid out to a certain degree, but you can see that this doesn't look really anything like what the thing does at the end. It's just a matter, because it's so frustrating when you're mapping everything out and you get to the end and you're like, oh, I'm 4 degrees short, so it happens all the time. All right. All the time. So but yeah, the colors, it's this observational process. You measure, you put all this information in, but then it's just me kind of like looking at this thing that most people don't look at for more than like 4 seconds. It seems to me it goes right in the recycling bin. And I spend hours and hours and hours looking at these things that really no one wants to look at. And I find the more I look at them, the more I want to look at them, the more I find that's interesting in them as well. So
you touched on the fact that you started with these parking lots color schemes, and it was kind of those you're always doing the original. Some of your older work were these swatches of parking lot area that were kind of this plein air landscape type painting. And so this connection to these circulars being the how did we say, the an extension of that
coming,
extension of that big box store landscape coming into your home. So I really find that interesting, that connection to landscape as not what we typically think of as landscape painting, but your origins with the older plein air work and the parking lot color schemes are. I find that very interesting, that connection. So and I will show a couple of the parking lot color schemes, which we have in this exhibition now. But those are also data-driven pieces, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. I think even like with just the circulars, I think I basically work like a landscape painter making these things. I know landscape artists aren't necessarily out measuring and things like that, but I think that it's the observation element of like being outdoors, the same kind of thing. And with these parking lot pieces, it's similar, because these are not painted on site. I found that it wouldn't be impossible, but it would be very difficult. So I ended up, using my phone. Every time I parked my car in a parking space, in a parking lot, those were the rules. I had to be that. I would photograph the parking space and write down the date, the time, and the location, and just keep these logs. And so, like looking at this one here, you see a lot of blue, and you see some brown, orange colors, and it's like, well, where were you parked? What was going on there? And a lot of this is from the distortion from the phone, depending on the time of the day and the shadows. So whatever the phone captures, that's what I paint. So it's almost like this second generation of this experience, because I think if I had my paints out and I painted it on spot, you wouldn't get some of these colors. Sure. And I think the phone distorts some of that. And I found that to be, pretty interesting. Like there's one down like in the lower center, it's like brown, and that I think it's from a street light or a parking lot light, and the kind of the cast that it made on the pavement was like this like orange color. That's what showed up in the photograph. So, and I'm a big fan of Ankawara. who, painted the date over and over and over and over and over again. And, this kind of work is, to me, it's like my, it's my version of his Today series. So if I look at this, I see my doctor appointments. I went to the grocery store. Sometimes I go 2 or 3 times a day. I'm a little fanatic about that, So sometimes these things you don't want people to know that, oh, what's going on here, but, sometimes it's a very unusual place, but most of the time it's very mundane, kind of just things that everyone else does, and just record it down and try to keep it very generic in description. And I think that the date and the time is important because the light is important in terms of what I'm painting. So yeah, and during, actually, going back to like the pandemic, I started doing the like my parking lot series over 20 years ago, and I was planning on doing this like almost like anniversary project of going back to the parking lots that I painted 20 years ago and seeing how it changed. Well, because of COVID, really, I didn't go out. And so I ended up instead, like out of my studio window, I can see my driveway and I can see my front lawn. And so every day I match the color of my driveway and front lawn, so it was like this like at home observations. It was little things like that. It's like the limitations, you find can be frustrating, but at the same time, they can also kind of allow you to do some things that you wouldn't necessarily think about doing.
Sure.
So, and that's hard to embrace sometimes, but
right.
I
think that your mention of the color, and I just want to let everyone else know that you are color matching with gouache and watercolor paint. All of these, so these images from your phone, you are mixing your paints to match the colors that you're capturing with your phone, or the colors that are actually printed on the circulars.
Absolutely, yes,
yeah,
that's a big thing. All about the color matching. It's like none of the colors that are in these projects are made up. They're all based on observation. Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to let her.
No, that's a big point. That's one of those things that you can kind of forget about. It's
sure.
so in your face. So yes.
So even though a lot of this work is data driven, does it hold any connections to memory or emotion for you?
It does.
It's almost as a journal piece. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but some of them seem, the parking lot series seems almost journalistic in nature. You are kind of a diary even.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even the circulars are. Like I did a project where I painted the cover of every Target flyer for an entire year. And it's this big project. It was like 53 circulars because you got one extra for Black Friday. So, every week I'd wait what's going to be and do the painting. And, for a while it was like, oh boy, how many times are they going to advertise all? Right. But then it started changing, so it became like this recording of time, in like seasons and fads and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, the parking lots, they're pretty, my work is, I don't know if people look at my circulars as being personal because I'm working with this very impersonal information, but it's like how I'm interacting with it, I find to be very personal. And with the parking lots, it's definitely personal. It's where I'm driving my kids to, picking them up, and every little thing that's going on in a car that I'm parking. So yeah, it is very diaristic, and in terms of like emotional, I'm not somebody that necessarily has, I don't think my work, it's like screaming with emotions, but I think, it's like when it's more about, it's almost like this kind of, come at you from behind in a way, or like sneak up on you. Like the more you start thinking about like, well, why are you doing these things and what's going on? And I think the kind of emotional aspect, it slowly kind of seeps in and it starts coming, at least I hope it does, because I've definitely made work where, more emotional, like the circulars, for example. You said the way you said they're so dynamic. There's a lot of power in those things. Sometimes the forms become, very lopsided and a little bit dumb in a way. And then sometimes they're like these dynamic, vacuums. Like I feel like you're just going to suck you in. And so I think that the emotion aspect, it's like, well, what's going on with these things? Like, what are they, what are they doing? So I've always been interested in not telling people, more about just kind of like comparing things and letting people kind of come up with their own conclusions.
Yeah.
So.
You mentioned that a fellow artist friend of yours had kind of suggested this more ordered, you came up with this formula kind of based off of suggestions from a friend of yours. I've just, do you collaborate with others often when you're creating work? And
I'm just having this conversation because I've been thinking about collaborating again. But the one artist that I mentioned, Bill Bergman, we've collaborated numerous times. He's a sculptor. And so we've done, a lot of sculptures, installations, outdoor, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of things. Some things like in landscapes. But I think primarily, I'm somebody who's just in the studio, working. But I really see a great value in collaborating. Whenever I do it, it's always been, I always learn something. And it's always like engaging to kind of see like, okay, here's my contribution. What's going to be your contribution, and how the two are going to work together. So I say if you ever have an opportunity to do that, I think it's really valuable, and I'm eager to do it again. I am.
Yeah. Okay, and here's another question from one of our students here. So how is making art in school different from making art after graduation? Are there
it's very different. It's very different. For one, you have the whole assignment thing and grade thing, and you got 4 months, and if you're in college, and there's all these kind of time, kind of this calendar laid out for you in terms of what you have to do. And all of a sudden, when you're out of school, there's literally no calendar. There's no, you have to self-impose these things, but there's nobody telling you what to do. So it's very different. And I know a lot. For example, my friend that I was talking about, Bill, he's somebody who notoriously really does not make work unless there's a deadline in front of him, a show or something like that.
Yeah.
He'll put it off to the and then he'll do it. He's not somebody that's going to be like, okay, I have an hour, let me go in my studio and work. At least that's the way he was in the past. I don't want to speak for what he's doing right now, but sure. He was notorious, in terms of last minute kind of thing. And it always worked out great for him. That's just how he worked. Where I've been somebody, because the more I've worked, these things take such a long time to do. I don't have that luxury. I can't put it off until, the midnight hour to get it done. I usually need months to get some of these things done. So I've gotten in this, I guess, the philosophy of like chipping away, of like, scheduling time to be in the studio and slowly kind of just getting something done over a period of time. And that's how I get it done, because otherwise it wouldn't get done. And I also found, I'm not going to speak for everybody because everyone's in different, coming from different places and different kind of experiences. But for me, when I was in school, I pretty much had just me to worry about. All of a sudden, get married, kids, job, all this stuff, and this kind of luxury of being in the studio in school and just worrying about myself, it was gone.
Yeah. And
so I ended up having to kind of like think about, like, when my second daughter was born, I was like, oh, how am I gonna, right before she was born, I was like, okay, I'm gonna be working, taking care of the kids. I'm gonna probably not be in the studio at all. So how can I make work where I'm doing something else at the same time. Like, how can I like split, make my time work for me? So I ended up making this project called, it's called Shopping Cart Inertia. And what it was is it's a drawing machine, really crude drawing machine that just follows the movement of a shopping cart while I'm grocery shopping. And I spent months trying to engineer this thing, get it figured out, and it ended up being like the simplest thing to kind of get it to work. And I think I got the thing up and running literally the day before my second daughter was born. And so it was like really cutting it close to the wire. But once it was done, I was like, okay, got to go to this grocery store. I have to, get this, get that. I was like, okay, I can make a drawing today, while I'm grocery shopping. And the drawing was made literally while I grocery shop. So, and I remember also, like when I got out of grad school, I had this great studio, and all of a sudden I was confined to this room that's, it was like 8 by 10, maybe a little bit bigger. And so I couldn't weld, I couldn't do any of this stuff that I had a luxury of doing in school. And so the big thing I did was like, okay, I'm going to get a little desk, a little light. And that really changed my whole like mode of production. I was like, okay, I have to make things that are small that can, be assembled at like a gallery. So, I couldn't make these gigantic paintings or drawings, but I knew that I could make a lot of small things that together like would piece together to make something larger. And then I also was, making installations that I knew would be completely destroyed at the end. So I could build this thing somewhere, and then, I wouldn't have to store it later on.
Right.
So it's really different. And I think, with a lot of my friends and, it's like, it all comes down, like, you got to be motivated, sure. And you find your own way to do that. But if you're not motivated, if you need a deadline, then find a deadline, find a show. If you need to, you got to be motivated to find these things. Otherwise, it's really easy to get in the habit of doing nothing, and also letting work and life kind of take over, and you're not making work anymore. And the next thing you know, 20 years go by, and you love art, but you're not making it.
Yeah. You touched on some. There's another question here from one of our students, and you've touched on some of these things, but maybe you have a little extra advice for students who might want to set up their own studio and earn a living making art after graduation. Do you have any maybe first steps for heading down that path?
Well, like for me, an important step was to go to graduate school. And for me, I went right after undergraduate school. It was really difficult. It was challenging, but I knew that, I wanted to teach. I really felt like I wanted to teach later on, and you need the MFA in order to teach, pretty much, so that was kind of like one. I wanted it for my own work development, but I also wanted it so I could, do this thing that I wanted to do, which was teach. But I'll be honest with you, I know so many artists, so many different paths that they've taken. And I think it all comes down to like your own skill set and interest in terms of, how you can make it work for yourself. It's just, there's so many ways, like there's no like one formula. Sure. I think the important thing is that you're able to, find a job that allows you to make some work. Like for me, I worked at a bank for 10 years. Even when I got out of grad school, I did a little bit of teaching, but I was working at a bank primarily. And I ended up drawing a lot at the bank. Actually, it was a time where I was making a lot of calls, and it was almost like my office. Like I was able to call this place for this supply and organize this. And I did all these drawings on bank envelopes, which I have like hundreds and hundreds of them, this archive. Yeah. So there's nothing that you can say like, oh, this won't work. This isn't an option, and I know like, for example, if you are, like I know somebody that did a double major, that he was a painter and a graphic designer. And, he worked at a big company for years, graphic designing, and then also was a painter. So it really, you have to be creative, a skill set. And I knew you were going to ask me this question, but we talked a little bit earlier about this. And this is a book that, I used to teach a senior seminar class. And this was a book that I think a lot of those questions, a lot of those things, it's very helpful in terms of, basic things like resume and cover letter, making contacts. And that's another thing too. I think that it's like applying to like almost any show you can find. Sometimes you may be like, well, that one's not for me, and okay, that's reasonable. But there's a local show that happens every year called the Mohawk Hudson Regional. It's a juried show. They bring in a juror in every year, a new juror, and a lot of like the direction that I went in terms of connections, it all kind of stemmed from one show that I had. It was a juror that was in from Chicago. She picked my work, and then later on, I tracked her down somehow and emailed her, and we kept in contact. Next thing you know, she asked if I wanted to have a solo show out in Chicago, and then that show kind of led to the next show and the next show and the next show. So it's important that you're just you're doing stuff.
Sure.
It's like, it isn't going to happen, if you're locked in your studio and no one's seeing your work. You got to be exhibiting. Now they have like these online registries, like White Columns. The online registry is very important. It's curated, and that's a really good thing to get on, especially if you're, for example, if you're in Jamestown. This is a place that is going to be looked at internationally. And you can still be where you are.
Sure.
So those kind of things are really important to kind of seek out. And your friends, people that you exhibit with, I strongly, and anybody you show with, really stay in touch with them, because they're going to be also doing the same kind of thing that you're doing. And it's really important that you stay in contact. And the next thing you know, things just kind of, they just kind of organically build off one another. As long as you are putting your best foot forward, it's really important to be doing that all the time. I think that you'll go very far just by continually staying in touch with people and getting your work out there.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. And we do a juried student show here on campus with our art students every year. And one thing I try to impress upon our students is that you have a different juror, you have a different show, and not to be to your point, apply to these shows to try to get your work into a number of different exhibitions, because you never, a rejection from one exhibition could mean, doesn't mean anything when you're, like I said, different juror, different show. So what might not get accepted into one could possibly get accepted into another, and making those connections through those. A lot of those juried shows or group shows, you really establishing those relationships and connections, I think, is very important for just advancing and growing in the arts. So I think that's all.
And you know what? This is a really simple thing, but I've heard people tell me this, and I've learned this, is just be nice.
Yeah.
That can take you so far. I mean, you don't really learn that in art school. Just be nice. It's like, it's like just being courteous, just being on time, just being, nice. Because I've had galleries tell me, oh, we don't work with people that aren't nice. They just basically come out and say that. And you know what? You leave a bad impression, all of a sudden that kind of that movement forward, it stopped. It's done. So just be nice.
I think that's great advice, Rich. And on that note, I don't want to take up more of your time. I think that this has been great, and I've enjoyed the discussion with you, and I'm excited to share this with our students. And again, thanks so much.
No, I enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you.
Rich Garrison, everyone, from our current exhibition, Kaleidoscopic. It's a group show here at the Jamestown campus of Jamestown Community College, and it will be up through March 25th. And if you can't make it down, please visit us on our website at weeksgallery.sunyjcc.edu, and you can take a virtual tour. This will be posted, this interview with Rich, and to that same website. So thank you all. Goodbye, Rich.
Bye-bye.